Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to Manhattan, New York. Also, I'd love to know, where are you from? December 31st, 2009. Shortly after 7 a.m., Scarlett Finson was found dead. It all began in 1998. 36-year-old Scarlett Finson was a young and beautiful woman. But Scarlett was also extremely smart and very ambitious. After graduating from university with a degree in finance, she began working for a prominent investment bank in New York. She was very successful and was well regarded in the industry. Looking at her, one might say she was a woman of success, lacking nothing in life. However, she was already in her 30s, still not found someone she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. She was eager to start a family and have children. She was ready for it, but the ideal partner continued to elude her. In 1998, Scarlett decided to take matters into her own hands and attended a singles event organized for people of the same faith as hers. It was there that she noticed a man who immediately caught her attention. He was very handsome, though she thought he must be much younger than her. When they began talking, it turned out she was right. The man's name was Anwick, and he was 11 years younger than her, but this didn't matter to her. As soon as they started talking, she knew he was the man she had been waiting for. She had never felt so connected to anyone as she did with him. Both felt an instant connection, to the point where they even considered driving to Las Vegas that night to get married. Scarlett called her sister and told her about the man she had just met, and that they wanted to get married immediately. Her sister managed to convince her not to go through with it, saying the decision was too hasty. Scarlett and Michael didn't get married that day, but their relationship developed rapidly. They were so captivated by each other that, just 6 weeks after meeting, they got engaged, and 6 months later, they were married. Scarlett's family wasn't sure if the rush was necessary, but she loved Anwick so much that she wanted to become his wife as soon as possible. After the wedding, everything seemed perfect in their marriage. Scarlett had no financial worries, so it wasn't a problem for her to move into a new apartment. They bought a place in New York, where they planned to welcome their first child soon. Scarlett had long dreamed of having a child, and less than 2 years after the wedding, their first child, a daughter named Sophia, was born. At that moment, Scarlett was probably the happiest person in the world. She was successful at work, had a handsome and loving husband, and now a beautiful daughter. She had everything she wanted for true happiness. Shortly after Sophia's birth, it turned out that Scarlett was pregnant again. She and Michael's happiness grew even greater when they learned that she was expecting twins. Unfortunately, their joy didn't last long as complications arose during childbirth. One of the children died shortly after birth, and the others survived only a few hours. The couple was devastated. It was a huge shock, and they didn't know how to cope with it. The stress that accompanied them during this time severely affected their marriage. They began arguing more frequently, especially since Scarlett was increasingly bothered by the fact that her husband had not worked since the beginning of their marriage. Michael had graduated with a degree in computer science but never worked in his field, and it seemed he had no intention of doing so in the future. He had other plans for his life. He wanted to become a professional poker player. To pursue his dream, he spent most of his time honing his skills by playing online. This clashed with the few jobs he held during their marriage, which were short-lived. He mostly worked as a stock trader, but only for brief periods because playing poker was his priority. Every time, it ended the same way, with his employment contract being terminated because he spent too much time playing and often didn't show up at work as he was busy with the game. But Michael didn't worry too much about being unemployed. He knew that Scarlett earned a good income and they could live off her salary alone. For most of the time since they got married, Michael didn't work professionally and dedicated his time to playing. This wasn't his only daily activity, as Michael also enjoyed going to the gym, often twice a day. Besides that, he did nothing, reaping the benefits of his wife's high income. Over time, this began to bother Scarlett more and more, leading to more frequent arguments. However, despite their marriage no longer being as perfect as it once was, they decided to try for another child. A year and a half after the death of the twins, Scarlett gave birth to a son named Jack. The arrival of their son did not improve the relationship between the spouses. While they were happy about his birth, Scarlett had growing doubts about her husband. She knew he wasn't very hardworking and didn't care about finding any job. He continued to dream of a career as a professional poker player, dedicating all his free time to playing. He could play all night, even when they went out to visit friends or family. Even in such situations, he would bring the game with him or play it on his computer. It seemed that Michael had become obsessed with it. And because he did nothing other than play, Scarlett could only dream of staying home with the children after their son was born. She had to return to work quickly to earn money for all the expenses. After all, she was the only breadwinner in the family. This situation started to bother her more and more, but that wasn't the worst part. Shortly after the couple celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Scarlett discovered that her husband had been cheating on her with various women. While playing online, he made connections with different women who also enjoyed playing. After some time, he would meet up with them to cheat on his wife. Scarlett found out about these affairs when Michael accidentally left an open email from one of these women on the computer. It seemed like he did it on purpose, as if he wanted Scarlett to find out eventually. Things had not been going well in their marriage for a long time. Scarlett was furious. But as if that wasn't enough, after she confronted him about everything, Michael decided to surprise her even more. He suggested that maybe it would be a good idea for them to see other people. He wanted their marriage to be open. Scarlett couldn't believe what she was hearing. She realized that their marriage was over. She scheduled a meeting with a lawyer and tried to work out the details of the divorce, hoping to do it in a way that would minimize the impact on the children. She arranged everything with a lawyer, but she didn't file for divorce at that time. In the meantime, Michael continued to have affairs without even trying to hide it. He would disappear for entire nights, and when he returned, Scarlett could smell women's perfume on him. He did this more and more often, meeting with dozens of women. One day, he contacted several women through Facebook, trying to arrange a date with one of them. His behavior made the atmosphere in her home unbearable, and Scarlett longed for Michael to finally move out. But where would he go? He wasn't earning any money, had no savings, and couldn't even afford to rent a small apartment. He knew very well that his wife had the money, so he proposed a deal. He would move out of their shared apartment on the condition that she would rent the apartment that had just become available in the same building, practically across the hall from their home, and pay the rent. This way, he would be close to the children and have no trouble visiting and taking care of them. On one hand, Scarlett didn't like the idea because it meant she would see Michael almost every day, but she thought it might be the best solution for their children. They would be able to see their father as often as they wanted and wouldn't have to experience the shock of him disappearing from their lives. After weighing the pros and cons, she decided to rent the apartment. Over time, it became clear that this wasn't the best decision. Michael would drop by their apartment whenever he wanted, since he still had the keys. He also became increasingly aggressive. Their arguments became more frequent, and Scarlett started to fear for her safety and the safety of her children. She changed the locks to prevent her husband from having free access to her apartment. After doing so, she finally decided to file for divorce. This didn't sit well with Michael. If they divorced, he would no longer have access to his wife's money. Who would fund his lifestyle? Despite his displeasure, he did nothing to try to convince his wife to save their marriage. Quite the opposite, he argued more and more often, leading Scarlett to request a court order to limit his visits. She feared for the safety of her children and did not allow frequent visits. After the court's decision, little changed. Michael continued to behave irrationally, to the point where he once grabbed her by the neck, threatening to kill her one day. Another time, when he had the children in his care and was supposed to bring them back, they didn't return on time. Scarlett tried to contact her husband, but he didn't answer the phone. She didn't know what to expect from him and started to fear for her children's safety. It turned out that Michael had taken them to the hospital, where he instructed them to say that their mother was mistreating them and inappropriately touching them. When the matter went to court, everyone could see what Michael was capable of, making these despicable false accusations. He was willing to do anything to control his wife, even if it meant manipulating his own children. After this incident, Michael was no longer allowed to meet with his children alone. Every time he wanted to visit or take care of them, it had to be in the presence of another person. Scarlett no longer knew what to expect from him. He had become unpredictable, and she was increasingly afraid of him. However, she didn't know that her husband had installed an app on her phone that allowed him to track everything she did. He knew her every move. He could see what she wrote in messages to friends or family. He could read all of her emails. That's how he learned about what Scarlett decided at the end of December 2009. She had had enough of his behavior and felt deeply betrayed by him. So she decided to change her will. In the event of her death, Michael wouldn't receive a dime. She informed her lawyer of her decision, and they scheduled an appointment for December 31st to formalize it. When she exchanged emails with the lawyer, she could not have known that their meeting would never happen. 2 days later, on December 31st, 2009, just after 7 a.m., Michael received a call from his 9-year-old daughter, Sophia. She sounded frantic and very distressed. Stammering, she tried to tell him that something had happened to her mother. Michael immediately ran to their apartment. When he arrived, his daughter told him that her mother was in the bathroom. As soon as he opened the bathroom door, he saw his wife lying in a bathtub filled with water. But the water was all red, and she showed no signs of life. He immediately pulled her out of the tub and called 911. Following the instructions from the emergency operator, Michael began performing CPR until the paramedics arrived. When the paramedics took over, they immediately realized that there was nothing they could do. Scarlett had been dead for hours. Soon, the police arrived at the apartment, and Michael explained the whole situation to them. He told them about the call from his daughter, how he tried to save Scarlett, and his suspicions about what might have happened. He noted that the door of a cabinet above the bathtub had been torn off its hinges, which could suggest that Scarlett might have slipped in the tub. She may have tried to grab onto the cabinet door, but it just came off its hinges, causing her to fall. During the fall, she could have hit her head and lost consciousness, which ultimately led to her death. It seemed like a tragic accident. Michael's explanation seemed plausible, especially since the police also spoke with Sophia, who said she hadn't noticed anything unusual either the previous evening or during the night. She even woke up during the night, though she wasn't sure what time it was, and heard someone taking a bath in a bathroom. When she peeked inside, she saw her mother lying in a tub with her head submerged in water, but she thought she was just washing her hair. Not thinking much of it, she went back to bed and fell asleep again. It wasn't until she woke up in the morning and went to the bathroom that she saw her mother still in the tub. She knew something was wrong and called her father immediately. Everything the police heard from Michael and Sophia led them to believe it was a tragic accident. So they didn't treat the apartment as a crime scene. There was nothing to suggest that someone else might have been responsible for the 47-year-old's death. Although there were a few scratches and bruises on her body, these could have occurred during the fall. Nothing alarming was found in the apartment, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence that someone had broken in. Believing it to be an accident, the police only took a few photos in the bathroom, but did not collect any fingerprints or DNA. They also didn't check the footage from the security cameras in the building. What really happened that night could have been clarified by an autopsy. It would have revealed whether she died from hitting her head, suffered heart attack, or if there was another cause. But before the pathologist could start the autopsy, a rabbi representing her family called. Initially, the family wanted the autopsy to be done, but since her death was deemed an accident, according to their religion, an autopsy could not be performed. Therefore, the cause of death on the death certificate was listed as unknown. Scarlett was buried very quickly, within 24 hours of her death, but doubts about how she died began to emerge just as quickly. Was it really an accident? Everyone knew that things were not going well between her and Michael. They were in the process of getting divorced. When the family started talking to her friends and acquaintances, they learned that she wanted to change her will. Her husband wouldn't inherit anything after her death. Since many people knew about this change, there was a high probability that Michael might have found out as well. The prospect of losing over $10 million was not something he would accept. This could have been a motive for him to take her life. But it wasn't just this fact that made the family increasingly suspicious. It was also puzzling that Scarlett's phone couldn't be found anywhere in the apartment. If she had only gone to take a bath, she should have left it somewhere. It was nowhere to be found. 5 weeks after her death, the phone suddenly reappeared on the nightstand in the bedroom. There was no way it could have been missed earlier. It was also strange that she had taken a bath that night. Firstly, those who knew Scarlett well were aware that she wasn't a fan of baths. She always preferred showers. But that alone wasn't conclusive evidence. What made the family even more suspicious was what they learned from her friends. On December 30th, Scarlett had undergone a hair straightening treatment. You do not wash your hair for at least 2 days after the treatment. She would not take a bath that same day and ruin what the hairdresser had just done a few hours earlier. These doubts led to the decision to exhume the body for an autopsy. The family began to suspect that Scarlett might have been murdered and wanted to know exactly what happened on December 31st. 2 months after her death, her body was back in the morgue. The same pathologist performed the autopsy, and the first thing he noticed was scratches on her face and petechiae in her eyes, indicating that she might have been strangled. Further examination confirmed this, revealing that her hyoid bone was broken. This was not an accident, it was murder. Michael was the prime suspect, but there was no evidence to prove that he had killed his wife. When the police decided to thoroughly search the apartment where Scarlett had lived, it was already 6 months after her death. Everything had been cleaned, leaving no chance of finding anything that could confirm their suspicions about Michael. Since no samples had been collected from the apartment earlier, all they had to rely on were the photos taken in the bathroom at the time. Even so, there were several details that didn't add up. There was no bath towel in the bathroom, where one would typically expect to find one. There was also no shampoo or conditioner nearby. They were found in the shower. However, these findings were only small details that could support the theory that Scarlett was murdered. They were not direct evidence that Michael was the murderer. Investigators tried to determine what Michael was doing that night and found out that, like many nights before, he had been playing an online game. He was playing with Julia, whom he had met through the game and had been dating for some time. They usually played almost all night, but on December 31st, around 1 a.m., Michael decided to stop playing. He claimed he was tired and wanted to go to bed. But it seems that wasn't entirely true because around 4 a.m., he went down to the building's lobby, where he chatted briefly with a doorman. This was unusual behavior for Michael, who typically wasn't the type to engage in conversation with a doorman. The doorman even said that Michael usually didn't pay any attention to him, let alone strike up a conversation. It seemed as though Michael had deliberately gone down there to be seen by the doorman, possibly to establish an alibi. Since the investigators had no solid evidence against Michael, he remained free, and the investigation stalled for several years. During this time, Michael continued his relationship with Julia, but they did not live together. She lived in her own house while Michael stayed with his parents who were taking care of his children. He continued to behave aggressively, which is why it was decided that Sophia and Jack would remain under their grandparents' care. Michael constantly pondered how he could get his hands on the money his wife had left behind. Her estate was worth over $10 million, and Michael made no secret of his desire to get that money. However, he had no access to cash from the account, and the only thing he could do was use the money in the children's accounts. He and Scarlett had set up accounts for their children to save money for their education. There was about $120,000 in those accounts, and after his wife's death, Michael withdrew all the money. But this wasn't enough for him. He kept thinking about how he could get his hands on those millions. He considered all sorts of plans to get the money. One of his ideas involved hiring someone to kidnap Sophia and get the money via ransom. Another plan was to frame Sophia for her mother's death. He thought about sending an email from her account in which she would confess that there had been an argument between her and her mother that night and that she had pushed her, leading to her death. Sophia would be blamed for it. The ideas became increasingly irrational, and Michael was losing control more and more. His parents had had enough and decided to kick him out of their home. They believed it would be better for the children not to see him every day. Michael was so unpredictable that they were afraid he would harm someone. Michael didn't take being kicked out well. He was furious when he found out that his parents had changed all the locks, leaving him unable to enter the house. Not only was he barred from his family home, his parents had also taken full custody of the children. It wasn't that Michael missed them terribly, it was because they were his ticket to fortune. No custody means no money. He knew he had to do something to regain custody of the children, but as long as his parents were alive, this would be impossible, so he decided the only solution was to get rid of them. But how? His ideas ranged from poisoning them to setting fire to their house while they were inside. He shared all these ideas with Julia, who became increasingly terrified by what she was hearing. Fearing for her own safety, she began recording their conversations. When Michael and Julia broke up in 2014, she decided to go to the police and share everything she had recorded. Although there was nothing in the recordings that directly implicated him in Scarlett's death, investigators could see the kind of person Michael truly was. He didn't care about his loved ones. Money was his only priority, and he couldn't control his anger, often descending into fits of rage. By the end of 2015, it seemed that enough circumstantial evidence had been gathered to charge the 42-year-old Michael with the murder of his wife, and he was arrested in November. He was just 2 months short of collecting the money from his wife's insurance policy. Scarlett's life insurance was worth $2 million. However, since she was murdered, Michael could only receive the money 6 years after her death, provided he wasn't charged with Scarlett's murder during that time. The money would have been deposited into his account on December 31st. He was arrested on November 1st. The trial began only in 2019, 10 years after Scarlett's death. There was no physical evidence directly linking Michael to the crime. The case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, but what the investigators had managed to gather over the years led the jury to find Michael guilty of murdering his wife. Michael was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Interestingly, his children did not believe that their father could be responsible for their mother's death. They maintained his innocence. Michael remains in prison, and all attempts at appeals were denied. After a rejected appeal in 2022, Sophia wrote a letter to the district attorney, expressing her continued support for her father and her belief in his innocence. Thank you for being with us. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us so much and we really appreciate it.